In the late 1970s, playing the early editions of Dungeons & Dragons was often a ruthless exercise in pure subterranean accounting. This was the Gygaxian era of design, named after game co-creator Gary Gygax. It favored massive funhouse dungeons, sprawling labyrinths where a vampire, a dragon, and a pit trap might occupy adjacent rooms with no ecological logic or shared backstory. Success in these games was measured in data. Players mapped the grid, extracted the gold, and accumulated experience points, or XP, to increase their character's power. It was a game of survival played against a spreadsheet. This mechanical loop encouraged a specific type of playstyle, later known as the murder hobo. Characters wandered from dungeon to dungeon, slaughtering every inhabitant they encountered for the sole purpose of extracting wealth and leveling up. These early modules were toolkits rather than scripts, leaving a narrative vacuum where overarching plots, emotional stakes, and genuine heroism were secondary to the body count. In 1979, an obscure, self-published adventure called Rahasia challenged this standard. It was a 33-page booklet bound with cheap black tape, printed in a limited run of only 200 copies. This indie project provided a new map, and with it, an entirely new psychological objective for the tabletop gaming hobby. Rahasia was the work of Tracy and Laura Hickman. The couple had grown tired of the illogical monster placement in official D&D modules, questioning why a creature with a complex backstory would wait in a 10-by-10 room just to be killed by passing looters. Laura drafted a narrative that pulled from Tracy's time as a missionary in Southeast Asia. She replaced standard Western tropes with motifs drawn from Indonesian culture, such as the temple acolytes known as the Siswa and the dark cleric called the Rahib. They structured the game around a specific manifesto. The why of the adventure mattered as much as the how. Instead of a rumor about gold in a tavern, players were drawn in by a desperate handwritten plea for help from an elven maiden. This schematic shows their commitment to architectural logic. The dungeon wasn't random. It was an elven temple built directly over the crushed ancient foundations of a wizard's tower, explaining the distinct shift in traps and layout as players descended. As a nod to his own inspirations, Tracy actually repurposed the map for that buried tower from his home group's recreation of J.R.R. Tolkien's Orthanc, the Tower of Isengard. The most radical shift was the introduction of forced pacifism. The elven guards encountered in the temple weren't monsters. They were innocent students trapped under the villain's mind control. Rahasia actively penalized the traditional murder hobo playstyle. If players used lethal force against these brainwashed elves, the game instructed the dungeon master to dock their experience points or lower their moral alignment. Rewards were reserved for subdual and restraint. By tying character progression to ethical choices, the module forced players to act as moral heroes rather than opportunistic looters. The Hickmans initially wrote these modules to fund their own hobby. They hoped the sales would generate enough capital to buy the newly released Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rulebooks. In 1981, a disastrous business deal left the family facing $30,000 in bad checks. Facing total bankruptcy, they needed a financial miracle to survive. Tracy approached the industry leader, TSR, hoping to sell the copyrights to Rahasia. He famously stated he made the offer simply so he could afford to buy shoes for his children. TSR executives reviewed the submission and recognized its narrative depth. They purchased the rights and immediately offered Tracy a full-time position as a game designer, relocating the family to Wisconsin. This desperate sale effectively moved an indie, narrative-first design philosophy from a self-published booklet into the heart of the world's largest gaming corporation. Once at TSR, Rahasia was polished and combined into the B7 compilation. It received professional cartography and a lush, oil-painted cover that signaled a new, cinematic era for the game. The narrative structure pioneered in Rahasia became the blueprint for the Hickmans' later work, directly influencing the creation of both the Ravenloft and Dragonlance franchises. This success created a lasting friction in the community, sparking the ongoing debate between sandbox and railroad design. Critics argued that Rahasia traded player freedom for a railroad, a scripted adventure path where the dungeon master ensures the players experience specific emotional beats and cinematic climaxes. Despite these critiques, the commercial success was undeniable. The popularity of the B7 module proved that a vast segment of the audience craved mythic melodrama over open-world aimlessness. By prioritizing moral objectives over gold counts, Rahasia established the narrative model that would define D&D's most successful story-driven expansions. It proved that players would choose structured, cinematic goals over a blank map, turning the dungeon into a stage for specific plotted stories.